Hello lovely people, Thyworm here with another extensive and honest build guide for Last Epoch patch 0.8.5d. This is a guide where I level a character from scratch without cheating and give you a fair take on a build. Please check all the links in the description for all info, planner, loot filters, second channel, etc. This character, Dorothy, is my take on a throwing build for rogues. It's fairly successful, does regular empowered timelines well, but most of all it is a very fun build. It's fast, it looks cool, it's decent, but it doesn't really work on higher corruption, at least with my gear. Scaling throwing damage is not all that easy, it turns out. I still, however, want to put builds like this out there to keep it real and to show you what builds can and cannot do. Here are the pros. It's a fast mapper with decent damage and decent clear speed. In this patch, where killing monsters is more rewarding, that is nice to have. Leveling with Shurikens works fairly well. It is a satisfying playstyle because the monster animations and rogue animations are well made, especially compared to the other classes. It feels good to play. It has good performance in terms of frame rates, and there's only one autocast, which you can self-cast too, making this controller viable. Then the cons: the build is not very tanky and it relies on dodge, meaning you can get one shot. Scaling throwing damage into endgame is not that easy, and it doesn't handle high corruption or tier 4 dungeons well because of a lack of damage and defenses. Let's start with the build requirements. There are no real requirements. I will cover here the uniques I am using, but they're probably not the best items even in slot or something. I just like to use some of the uniques, and if you don't have these, you can still totally play the build. It's no issues whatever. I have the woven flesh, mainly for crit avoidance. Just getting that capped is nice, and the leech is useful as well. This drops from the abomination in the first timeline. I use a legendary version of the Thorn Slinger, which has throwing attack speed, movement speed and +1 to physical skills, giving us some skill points. This is a common random drop. And finally, Leraka's Claws, also a common random drop, providing up to 130% crit multi and 2 projectiles for Shuriken. The only other unique to consider would be the Riverband Grasp, maybe, which synergizes well with our build too. Then the build philosophy. This build is just fun to play, and I wanted to see what throwing abilities on a rogue are like these days. With decent investment, it is not amazing, but it is workable. My builds are achievable, though this is all solo self-found and it's a realistic approach, and I think that's worth something as well. We're dual wielding because a rogue should carry 2 weapons, right? So what do you need in terms of stats? Here's the wish list. In terms of defenses, make sure you get res capped of course and get 100% crit avoidance. Early on you can use the woven flesh for easy crit avoidance, and I even use it in late game. The blessings in the monolith can help a lot here with resistances as well as idols. Furthermore, you want health and dodge and glancing blow. In terms of offense, we're scaling dexterity and all sorts of throwing stats that we can find. We're going on a crit route as well with crit chance and crit vulnerability. Mana isn't all that important once you have the reduced mana cost affixes on rings. Let's look at the skill specialization and the skills that we're using. I will not discuss each point invested, but instead focus on the most important nodes. You can see everything in the build planner for yourself. Let's start with Shurikens. I turned Shurikens into a single chakram with the node chakram, which has twice the size of a normal Shuriken and 30% more damage. If you take Keen Throw, you get 10% more damage per Shuriken you would otherwise throw. By default, you throw 3 Shurikens. We're taking 2 nodes that give us 2 extra Shurikens per node, so that is 7. And then we have the unique Leraka's Claws for 2 additional Shurikens, bringing it to 9 total. You throw a single chakram, so that means that 8 out of the 9 get converted into 80% more damage, which is a lot of additional damage. We go to crit route as well with Jagged Edges and Massacre. Final point, I put in Alacrity, because throwing speed just makes a skill like this feel a lot better to use. Up next, Shift, our movement ability. This skill serves multiple purposes apart from being a movement skill. First, we pass to the bottom right to Lasting Presence, which creates a shadow. Shadows throw Shurikens too, by the way, and then Dancing Shadow, making you use Shadow Cascade at the end of Shift. We'll get into this. We're using Emergency Flask for automated potion usage when you are below 50% health, which is really useful. I'm using Swift Recovery to regain some mana because we're using Shift a lot. I only have 1 point in sleight of hand because it's honestly not that important, but it is still nice to throw a chakram after shifting. We take Consumed by Shadow, giving shift Culling Strike, instantly killing anything we hit that has less than 15% health. And finally Hidden Blades, meaning we stack up Shadow Daggers when we hit enemies. Once you reach 4 Shadow Daggers, they crit the enemy. It is a guaranteed crit, and this ability does physical damage, which we are scaling. This is some nice additional damage for the build. Then, let's go into Shadow Cascade, which we are casting at the end of shift. Reason we're picking this skill is because Shadow Cascade has a bunch of throwing damage nodes in the top right. Starting with Dagger Dance, throwing 4 piercing daggers when you use Shadow Cascade, so at the end of shift. Then up Porcupine's Wrath for 3 extra daggers and 90% more damage. And then Shadow Elegance, stacking up more Shadow Daggers on enemies. Then Dagger Flow, making the daggers fly further. And finally Fray, because honestly there aren't any other points you want to take as the melee component of Shadow Cascade isn't working anymore. Maybe you could go Armor Shred instead, I'm not even sure if that works. The final points I put in Onslaught for mana refunds, Fights in the Shadows for more mana gain, and Gloomstalker for more shadows, meaning more Shurikens, more mana and more Umbral Blades. But we'll get to the Umbral Blades. Because talking about Umbral Blades, this is our single target skill. Shurikens is for the trash and this is for the bosses. I turned Umbral Blades into a single massive rotating homing blade that is very convenient to use and it procs automatically. The skill itself is rather clunky by default with recalling and such, so automating this is quite nice. Let me explain. The first node we pass to is Sword Thrower, which makes Umbral Blades just throw one massive blade instead. Cacophony of Steel makes the blades spin, hitting enemies 2 times per second. There is a maximum of 3 Blade Storms. Steel Torrent makes the Blade Storms wider, meaning they hit more targets, and now they also last longer. And Loathing turns them into homing missiles, which now seek out enemies and they follow enemies too. It's not very fast, but it is definitely worth it. Then Lethal Darkness, once again building up Shadow Daggers. I'm sure you can see the synergy by now. Precision Cuts make you throw the blades where you point the mouse, which is very useful. And then the automation part, first take Edge of Obscurity, making the blades deal more damage per Dusk Shroud on you. We will have around 8 stacks or so, and it's doubled for Smoke Bomb, so that adds up. It could be up to 128% more damage, which is a lot. And then finally Umbral Remnant automates the blades because whenever a shadow expires it casts a blade. And shadows expire quite a bit. We generate shadows and make them expire using Smoke Bomb, but also using Shift and also using Shadow Cascade. Shadows expire all the time and then they cast Umbral Blades or Blade Storms, and a maximum of 3 is there. You in the meantime, you're just casting Shurikens and it all works really well. Finally, we have Smoke Bomb. A few things are important here. First, you go north to Shrouded in the Darkness, giving Dusk Shrouds. This skills our Umbral Blades damage and it provides dodge rating and glancing blow chance. Then Rapid Concealment for twice as many Dusk Shrouds. Then we go south to Lingering Fumes for increased duration. This means the Smoke Bomb is almost permanently up. Smoke Bombs giving us 50% increased throwing attack speed per second. Smoke Blades, they give us 50% increased throwing damage per second, up to 200% throwing damage, which helps out a lot of course. Blood Bandit does a decent job leeching health. Together with Woven Flesh you're around 8 to 10% leech. And Umbral Assault creates some shadows in the cloud. 25% chance is enough, you don't need that many shadows because you can only have 3 Umbral Blades active at the same time after all. Time to look at the passives. I will highlight a few interesting decisions as most of this is rather straightforward. In the base tree, take Swift Assassin for attack speed and fist damage. Twin Blade lets you dual wield, something we use a lot in the tree as well. It does make you take 15% increased damage, which is one of the reasons you are not that tanky, but hey, we're a rogue, right? Dodge and parry is nice defensively, and Duelist is a good hybrid node, some dodge and some attack. Critical Precision you can fill up for more crit, but I didn't feel the need to be crit capped. Late game I started working on evasion for less damage taken while moving. Our mastery is Blade Master, starting with Pursuit, also for the movement speed. Once is a lot of added damage, which is great. Cloak of Shadows is more dexterity and glancing blow, and Shroud of Dusk is some nice health and more Dusk Shrouds. Then we take some crit nodes, 5 points in Flash of Steel for the bonus over there, providing throwing attack speed. Critical Eye is great because of critical vulnerability, and it works like this. You now have 25% chance to afflict enemies with an ailment that makes them 5% more likely to crit, and this stacks. You can read this as you getting 5% base crit chance, which stacks. In short, on trash this doesn't do much, but on bosses this guaranteed you will be crit capped because we're hitting bosses a lot with all of our spinning blades, shurikens, shadows, etc. So it's a really great node. All in is good for 75% crit multi. It doesn't matter, our regular attacks do less damage. We killed trash anyway, and for bosses he wants the crit multi. I take 1 point in Shadow Master for 1 extra shadow, and finally a Suvon's Pact, more dodge and damage while at full health, which we typically are. There is one node you probably should take here, but I didn't. It's called Argent Veil for Silver Shrouds, basically a free dodge if you drop health. Especially for bosses, this should be great. We put some nodes in Marksman too. Focus Fire, 7 points for the dex and because we need to spend the points. Concentration, it's another buff. It gives us 120% increased damage if we are not getting hit. Because we are ranged and because we dodge a lot, we're typically not getting hit, so this is a great buff which is usually up. If you do get hit, you lose the buff for 4 seconds. In the UI, in-game, you can't see that you have the buff. You can only see you have the debuff when you lost the buff, the 4 seconds. That is showing for some weird reason. Meditation reduces the cooldown of those 4 seconds and it gives you flat dodge too. Reflection is additional dodge and movement speed is both very nice. Then, also very important, gear. I am basically getting all the flat and increased throwing damage I can, as well as mana reduction. For daggers, you want obsidian daggers because they have 4% flat crit, up to 80% physical damage implicit, and ideally you roll them with crit multi and increased fizz damage. The rest of my gear is once more not amazing. This is just stuff I found while playing. My relic doesn't even have a +2 Umbral Blades, so there's a lot of room for improvement here. I just want to show you once again these builds with achievable gear if you just play the game, instead of taking super high tier items and basically or actually cheating the game. For idols, I'm taking the crit multi when dual wielding ones plus some defensive ones to fill up the resistances. Because I'm taking a few uniques here, you're struggling a bit with resistances. It makes a build more fun in my opinion, finding a use for some of the uniques, but it is not optimal. My idols compensate a bit for this. For blessings, I'm taking all the resistance blessings because I don't want to deal with resistances too much. It's really nothing special, check the builder. I'm not even capped on grand resistances because I can't be bothered to grind all of them. I created a loot filter specific for this build. I used the thing myself from the start. I leveled all the way to level 91 using this filter, so let me walk you through it. I recolored idols for you with affixes that you want. Those are flashy green with all the affixes that give you levels for the skills that you're using, plus some really good affixes otherwise. The loot filter shows normal items up until level 10. It hides all non-rogue gear except uniques, set items and exalted items, and it shows in the end game only top tier daggers. And then there are more colors for all your other loot, starting at the bottom with yellow and gradually getting stricter all the way up till purple. At some point I put a level cap on most of those rules, so yellow items will show up until a certain character level, level 38, and then they don't show up anymore. It should be smooth sailing. Here's the build in action. It's very stylish, I feel, very fun to play, spinning blades everywhere, and rogues still have the best animations and movement abilities in the entire game. It just feels good to play rogue, and throwing out all this stuff is great. Just using shift unleashes all sorts of mayhem on a map, something I really appreciate. For bosses, it's really not that bad either, because you can stack 3 Umbral Blades on the boss and those things do a lot of damage while you dodge attacks. In the meantime, you should hide in your smoke cloud, stack those dodges and defenses and throw chakrams. I use decoy as well sometimes on the right mouse button, and that's really all there's to it. Talking about leveling for a bit, at the start, shurikens don't really do damage. You need some gear with throwing damage on it, and once you do and you are a shadow dancer, it gets a lot better. After level 25 or so, it is really smooth. Before that, especially on bosses, consider just using flurry with your melee weapons. It probably does more damage. Let's talk some Monolith Modifiers. We can be very short about this because you can honestly take anything. Even crit avoidance, because we shred crit avoidance. And that is it. I spent a good chunk of time on these guides, which is why I don't release too many of them. If you appreciate the effort, consider liking or subscribing. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.